I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall.
Hello and welcome to another. Whoa, what's going on? We've got a new theme track. I'm going to get copyright violations there, Gillian. Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm your host, Peter Dixon, and great to have you all joining us for our new time slot. Wednesday, supposed to be 4:30, but we're starting a bit late. What else is new, everyone says. And I've got special guest Gillian Ford here with me today. Hi, Gillian.
Hello.
Great to have you back. And we've got
Sorry about the phone. That was my gardener, and I told him that I was going to be on soon.
That's totally fine. And great to have Mevy Whittaker with us. How are you, Mev?
I'm well, thank you, Peter, and thanks for the invitation.
Great to have you on the program. In fact, I want to have you back another time because you've got some interesting thoughts on other topics that we can talk about at another time, but I want to bring you in. Now, we've also got in the messenger group, because we couldn't get him online here today, we'll try again next week because we're going to have another one or two episodes on the record article over the next couple of weeks. So John Rosier is with us in the Facebook group, and hopefully Jean Bedford has found a way here too. I don't know if Gillian, you could send her a quick message and tell her we are live. And we've got John Rosier here has just said, I'm in the text. J Rosier. And yes, you can just put J after it and I'll know it's you there, John, because we did want John's thoughts and feedback on this topic as well. So today and every Wednesday, I'll be doing what I'm kind of calling reaction videos, where I pick a topic that is out there in Adventist land, whether it's a video or an article, and I react to it. And I either have some guests or we get people that are watching to comment and react as well. And then Thursdays, of course, as always, Australian time, Sydney time, we do the normal interview. And tomorrow we've got Brendan Valiant. He's going to be talking about the lunar Sabbath. So that's tomorrow. But they're the long play interviews that we just chat for ages. And the Wednesdays are going to be the shorter ones. And today we're talking about an article that came out in the Record magazine here in Australia, I think about a week ago. And it caused a lot of comment in the Adventist world here in Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific, and I think even beyond. Some people have said that the article is rewriting history. I tend to agree, and there are some inaccuracies presented in there. And we really thought, you know what, we need those of us that love seeking truth and love, to get the history as accurate as possible. Wanted to gather together, comment, and just correct it. We're not criticizing whoever wrote it. There's a mystery person that wrote it. We're not criticizing the record at all. I love the Record magazine. I used to read it every week. It was a highlight of my Sabbath to get the Record sent to all the churches every week. It's a fantastic way to network and keep that sense of community going. So we're not rubbishing anybody. We're just simply saying, let's try and correct the facts. To start today, and by the way, I have invited people from the Record to come on the program, and maybe they will get back to me, and maybe they will come on the show later and just share their thoughts. So what we're going to do to start off is look at a brief 2 minutes of the John Ankerberg interview with Walter Martin and William G. Johnson, and we're going to see how the Adventist viewpoint of Glacier View, that's what we're talking about. The Record article was about Glacier View, Des Ford. I may not have said that before. That's what we feel the rewriting of history is. Rewriting what happened at Glacier View to make it seem more palatable to the Adventist community. And the reality is that it is, in my humble opinion, very inaccurate. And I don't think the people in the modern days are trying to be inaccurate, but they are following material that they've been given over the years. And that's why I'm showing the first video. This is Bill Johnson, perhaps towing the more Adventist apologetics line. And then we're going to play the next interview he did many, many years later with me in 2020, May 2020. And in that interview, he shares way more of what actually happened at Glacier View. So there's a big spiel about what's happening today. Please, in the comments, correct me anytime I'm saying things wrong. And we're going to get Gillian and Mevy to comment on the video and help me out today. So, and John in the comments as well. So let's get started. We'll watch these two videos back to back, and then we'll start some comments. Then we're going to talk about the article and actually read it as well. I wish I wasn't going live. I would have edited all of that down to about 2 sentences. Anyway, here we go. Here's 1984, the John Ankerberg show. Watch it closely. There's some gold in them thar hills.
The final bottom line is, you disagree with Mrs. White? You're out.
No, the bottom line is the 27 fundamentals of belief. And you talked about the General Conference in session. It is only the General Conference in session, which is a large gathering from around the world, that can change in any way the fundamental beliefs of this church.
Well, it sounds to me, Walter, that Dr. Johnson is advocating a new view, and I'd like to push him a little on that view. And that is
I'm not advocating a new view.
Okay, the view that I hear is that we can disagree with Ellen White, and that is of no consequence.
That's what we're hearing.
Well,
that's what I'm hearing.
It happens in practice in certain parts of the world.
But that's the one illustration we were bringing up. It seems in practice that that's the only thing that we can see against a guy like Des Ford, Walter Ray.
Desmond Ford's teachings were tested against the Scripture. And the Glacier View group, testing them against the Scriptures, did not see light in his view. It is out of that context, not against Ellen White.
Because they judged Desmond Ford at the Glacier View conference by Ellen White. That's exactly why he isn't there anymore. Whenever it came at that conference to a point of disagreement on what Desmond Ford was saying, the appeal on the part of the Adventists judging him was not to Holy Scripture, but to what Mrs. White's interpretation of Scripture was. Now, that's why Ford is not there.
Walter, I'm very interested to hear this, because I was there. I didn't see you there.
No.
I was with Desmond Ford for 6 months on a committee that worked over his large manuscript.
And I understand that you were...
I was present, and I took part in writing the consensus statement for Glacier View. I think I know the dynamics of Glacier View. And frankly, I disagree with you as one who was there.
Well, I talked to people who were there too, including Desmond. He has a little different view of you, and he was the guy on the hot seat, not you. He was the guy that paid for his convictions by leaving the denomination, not you.
Let me just say, he is still a member of this church. He has not been disfellowshipped. Let's be quite clear on that, as Walter Ray has not been disfellowshipped.
Yeah, I know,
the term disfellowship was used earlier. There have
took
been
away his
ministers.
pension and took away his security and took away his reputation and discriminated against him publicly and held him up to ridicule, but we haven't disfellowshipped him.
He didn't. His pension was not taken away, excuse me.
He was going to sue you, wasn't he?
Okay, when we come back.
Okay, so that's the first one, and I'll get you guys to comment in a minute after we've played the second one. There's words like "did not see light in his views" at Glacier View. The implication is the majority tested Des to the scriptures and found him wanting as the majority. The article takes that view as well, and John definitely suggests that in this interview. Watch what happens in this interview, 2020, and as I said, it was so good having Bill on the show. As retired, maybe able to speak a bit more, maybe some of the thoughts have gone through his head over the years. This is very revealing, and I think paints a much more accurate view. Let's watch this. It's another short clip.
Guess who? The same three that worked the year before on Righteousness by Faith. Hazel, Guy, and Johnson. And we followed the same format, except this time we had, statements that came from the breakout groups. And we tried to put them together and weld them together. And we developed what we called a consensus statement. That came, Glacier View, the conference itself, was scheduled to end at noon on the Friday, okay? Friday morning, the consensus statement that we developed was brought to the floor. It was read, it was discussed, and it was voted. If not unanimously, very close. And very interestingly, Desmond Ford said, I can agree with everything in this statement.
Yeah, I understand that people left the meeting feeling quite positive about the consensus statement.
Yeah, but here's where things went off the rails, I believe.
Yeah.
So we're getting just an hour or two and the conference is going to end, and I'm feeling incredible relief.
Yeah.
Because it's been a week of high tension, high drama. And then suddenly another statement appears. I had no knowledge of it beforehand. It was a statement that had been prepared by a committee of 6 the day or the night before. And it had 10 points where Des Ford, his ideas disagreed with church teaching. And it was never discussed, it was never voted, it was simply read and taken away.
So who's behind that?
I would like to know. I'll give you my speculation, and remember, speculation. I think the leaders from Australia, where there was a lot of opposition to Des, that's why they'd sent him to Pacific Union College. I think they felt they had to go back with some decision to tell the people in Australia. And I think it was at their urging that this was developed. And the people who were involved in writing, the 6 people, for years I never knew who they were. They were never identified, okay?
To this day?
One was Norm Young. He could tell you, Norm Young,
Yeah.
he could tell you. I was shocked when I heard he was on it, because these 10 points became the basis for the stuff that Des was subjected to. That same afternoon, Friday afternoon, he was called before an administrative group, and with the Australians all there, of course, the Australian leaders. And this 10-point statement was the document that was used to really roast him. all sorts of things are said about Glacier View, and all sorts of people who are not there have all sorts of opinions on it. By and large, I'm much more positive than what many say. I don't think it was set up from the beginning, but I was at the time, and to this day, deeply disturbed by this statement brought in at the 11th hour, as it were, which to me was not following the pattern of Jesus to be open and straightforward. It just reeked of cloak and dagger stuff. That may be unfair. You could ask Norm Young or others, but I know Norm, I've heard him say, when I heard that he'd been in that committee, I said, how could you be part of that group? He said, we were led to believe that this statement would be used in a totally different way. And so he felt that he'd been used.
Wow.
So that has left to this day a very bitter taste in my mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, so left to this day a bitter taste in his mouth. And we certainly get I think, a completely different view of what happened at Glacier View than from the first interview. He says there that he didn't think it was a setup, but he also says it was not following the pattern of Jesus, I think, something like that. I'm going to stop talking, and Gillian, tell us your immediate thoughts on those two clips. Mevin, we'll get you to give your thoughts, and then we're going to read the actual article.
Right. I'll try and do this fast.
Yes.
In watching Bill Johnson, it's quite painful for me. He's probably the person who I feel most pained about Glacier View, because if you read his letters to Hamill, he's not totally opposed to Des's ideas. Now, they did have some differences, and I don't want to get, I've talked about some of these things before. For instance, Bill had done his PhD on Hebrews, and he did not see the role of the Day Atonement in the book of Hebrews. So he was different with Des on that. And he said in one of his letters to Hamill, he said most scholars would go with Des on this. So Des did differ with him on some things. But see, Bill came up to Des at Glacier View, and I was there. I really didn't know him. There was a generation gap between me and Des's friends. They were good friends, but I'd never met him. And Bill said, Des, you know where I stand, pretty much where you do. So his reaction afterwards, and really the way he treated both of us, I mean, I was nothing really. I just went along for the ride. But Bill brought the story, which was told by the Australasian leaders, what a bad girl I was, particularly in my so-called liaison with Bob Brinsmead, which was absolutely untrue. It was made up. But John Brinsmead told Parmenter. And instead of talking to me about it, they acted as though they believed it. And one of the things on the Friday afternoon that was huge, Bob Brinsmead was in the room. But of course, when you get to the ministry, he's not mentioned. The letter that was given to Des on the Friday afternoon, see, I'm already going off track, but it doesn't mention Bob Brinsmead, but the one on Friday afternoon did. Des was going to have to separate himself from Bob, and Des says, I can't do that. I don't agree with his methods. But I said, he's a Christian brother, and I'm not going to save my job by opposing him. But that was one of the big things. Anyway, back to...
So can I ask a question about that? So we've got Glacier View. It was on for about a week. On the Friday, they have this consensus statement that is brought out. They all, majority, says Bill in that second clip, agree with it, can go along with it. Even Des can go along with it. They then wheel out this other 10-point statement. Are you saying that on that statement was the Brinsmead connection, and that Brinsmead was there in the afternoon?
No, he wasn't actually there, but
Right.
they talked about him. He was the big bugbear in the room, and it was because they thought that Des was in cahoots with Bob, and they'd been told this by his brother John. So they went after Des on it, but John had told them that I was the mediator, so Des could say that there was no connection. But anyway, that is a side thing, but it was very big. So just to go in this report, to keep it tied to this new record article, and this is the main thing that I want to say, because I could say a lot about what Bill said. It says in the article that there were 3 consensus statements. Now, the unfortunate thing about that to me is, because I'm a bit of a historian, I've done a master's degree in history and I've written a number of history books, and that will go down in history that there were 3 consensus statements, but that is not true.
Yeah.
There was one consensus statement, and it was in 2 parts. One part was on the Bible, and one was on Ellen White. And they're called by different names. One of the big problems for lay people and researchers, and you've been through this problem, is working out which statement is which.
Yeah. And they change the name sometimes too.
If you want to know what the consensus statement is, it's written up. It's in the record. I don't have the pages numbers, but it's in ministry. And there's one, Christ in the Heavenly Sanctuary. That's the first one on page 15. Ministry, October 1980. And if you go into Adventist archives, you can, Spectrum archives, you can download it, you can read it for yourself. So the consensus statement is in there, but what's confusing to people is it doesn't say it's the consensus statement that I can recall. It might. And then the second half is something about Ellen White. And Bill told you in that second one that he and Fritz Guy and Gerhard Hasel put them together. Now, Fritz told me after Bill said that, and before he came on the program, because I was emailing them back and forth, he never saw anything of Hasel in the discussions. It was him and Bill. So now... Yes.
Yeah, he did mention that to me. I don't know
so
if it
when
was
they talk about the consensus statement, what Len pointed out in her interview, because she's a barrister, what a consensus statement is, it shows you whether 2 parties agree. So there's the church and all the attendees, and there's Des. And the consensus statement shows where in all their small groups, when they came and did reports, and they were asked questions pertaining to the Glacier View manuscript, Bill and Fritz put together the consensus statement.
Yes.
So on the Friday morning, the whole group, there's a full assembly. We're there for the reading of the consensus statement. It's read from the front. Everybody has a copy. Des is following along. And then at the end, they voted on it. And they didn't put it in the GC minutes, not clearly that it was voted on. And Milton, in his biography, says that there's no sign that it was voted on. But look, I was there. And fortunately, Bill in that second clip says it was voted.
Yeah.
And most people. But I'll tell you my memory. I'm sitting at the back next to Des, and he reads the consensus statements and he turns to me and he said, "This is great. I can live with it."
Yes.
Now, I'm not the only person he said it to. He said it to Fred Veltman. He obviously said it to Bill.
To Bill.
And then when it comes to the vote, they came along and they said to Des and me, "You can't put your hands up because you're not on the committee." We weren't on the committee, see, so we couldn't go in. We could go into the full assemblies. We weren't allowed to speak on the floor, in the meetings. So I remember the people down the sides counting the vote, all the hands going up.
Yes.
I think there were only 1 or 2, but you can't find any evidence in the paperwork of this.
That it was voted on.
Against it. So then they asked Des and I to leave. And we go out and they bring out the 10-point statement. This is what the person writing the Australasian record article says it's the consensus. But it's nothing to do with the group.
No.
This has been introduced, and it's 10 points where Des differs from the traditional view or the Dallas Statement. You know, you can argue about that. Everything is more complicated than I explain it, and I've tried to simplify it, but it's not easy. So we've got the 10-point statement. We're not there, but it's in Spectrum for you to read, and it's read out from the front. It's not given to the people. They did make some comments. Fritz Guy said, is this going to be used to discipline anybody? And Neil Wilson said, no, it's not. Lou Venden said something about he didn't agree with it. And he said he was told from, because I wasn't there, but this is what's in the paperwork. He was told, we don't want you to agree with it. We haven't shared it with Dr. Ford. You know, they've sent us away because we want to show it to him this afternoon and see what he thinks of it.
Yeah.
So that was never voted, but the consensus statement was. And I was there and I saw it. And fortunately, Bill has said it was there.
Yes.
So the big thing about these two clips is the first one, he's saying that the whole group didn't agree with Des. And the second group, he's saying the consensus, which he wrote.
Yeah.
He had a huge part in it, he and Fritz Guy. They wrote it. And it was showing where the group did agree with Des.
Common ground. There was common ground.
So those clips,
yeah,
you get the point.
Yeah.
Very, very different.
In that second interview, he was even saying how excited he was about that. Now, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just aware that people watching for the first time, we've got lots of jargon we know, like Glacier View and interviews. When we're talking about interviews that I've had, we're talking about season 2. They're just making their way now. I'm re-releasing them onto YouTube, so keep an eye out. We've just done the Bill Johnson one. It's the last thing we did on YouTube and Facebook. Go and watch it. So when we talk about interviews, like a Len being interviewed and Fritz Guy, and we're talking about season 2. Now, Glacier View was the meeting where Des Ford's ideas were being judged, not Des, or to be discussed. And how many people? Over 150 turned up, did they, to this Glacier View resort in Colorado?
It was 115 and a few people couldn't go.
Right. And
Harry Lowe couldn't go. Pearson couldn't go. He would have been there because they had heart problems.
That's right.
And one man had to leave because it was about 8,000 feet up.
Yeah. So this basically was in August 1980, correct me if I'm wrong, and brewing in decades before that were people wanting a more of a gospel-based kind of Adventism. And so the church began to kind of split, questions on doctrine split it. And so Des kind of became the lightning rod scapegoat for the person with these new theological ideas. And there were leaders, conservative people, fundamental, more liberal progressives. These ranks all began to kind of jostle and fight amongst themselves. And the leaders thought, we're going to fix it. And Neil Wilson thought, I'm going to fix this. So they had the big meeting. And what we're saying is that on the Friday, at the end of the week, out comes this consensus statement. Everyone goes, beauty, even Des, we can agree with this. Out comes then, and so we think it's going to be positive. Darren's asked a good question, which is part of what we're saying here. And then we're going to get your reaction, Mev. When did Des find out about the 10-point statement? Was it shared with him before the Friday meeting? Now, what Bill says is that it came out a day or two before. He didn't even know about it. It's wheeled out. Was it wheeled out in the group meeting after you two were asked to leave, or was it brought out in the smaller meeting where Des was kind of taken to the headmaster's office?
Both.
Right.
But the history of that, and if you want to read about it, Norm Young wrote a really fine article. I can't think of the title, but it's in Adventist Today. I think it's 2006. On the 10-point statement and his role in it, which he regretted.
Yes. Because
they were told, so it looks as though Wednesday morning at breakfast, Neil Wilson came to him. Presumably he was a very clever man. He picked 2 of Des's students to go on the 6-man committee. And they were asked to show where Des differed from traditional Adventism. I'd say 4 of them. I've got a list somewhere. Bill said he didn't know who was on the committee, but it's actually in the Ministry magazine, October 1980. I've put it up somewhere, the 6 people. And that was a political move to put Norman Arthur in there, Des's students. But they were told that a lot of the administrators couldn't follow the arguments. It's too complicated for them. They want to know, where did Des differ from the traditional view? So that's what they were told.
Yeah.
But all the time, Norman feels uneasy. He only wrote one of the points.
Yeah.
And he tried to change it before, and they wouldn't let him.
Yes.
So you've got the 6 people. The head of that was Spangler. And the screening committee, there's a group that was called the screening committee who rewrites what they say anyway.
Yeah.
But this was completely outside of Glacier View. It wasn't part of, like Bill said, he didn't know about it, and I believe him.
Yeah.
See, and a lot of the scholars left on the Thursday night, so they didn't even hear it read out. But it comes from Dallas.
Yes.
And, you know, Larry Geraghty wrote an article which everybody should read in June 1980 Spectrum after Dallas. He tells the story of how the 27 fundamentals were put together. And if you think these statements are perfect, just read it for how it's hatched and changed, this and that. And he quotes Wilson, and Wilson said people are worried about us changing our beliefs. We're not going to change our beliefs. Now remember, and Bill says this, you only change doctrinal things at a general conference, and they'd done it at Dallas. They had no intention of doing it at Glacier View. And the first meeting with Wilson, he stood up and he said that. He said, we've made ourselves a good statement. You know, one day we might want to update it, but this week's not going to change it. If you go through his comments before and after in the ministry, you can work out that this was the plan.
Yes. Well, that's what was interesting.
The consensus was used.
That's the other interesting thing, is that people are saying, "Oh, it's not a setup," but we think in the 200 hours of interviews that have happened that it's pretty clear this was they wanted this conversation to end. They wanted the new theology to end. They didn't want the authority of Ellen White questioned. Now, we're just going to pause. We're going to come to the article in a minute where you'll be able to say this. But just.
Well, I just wanted to say on this 10-point statement that this Australian Record article makes the 10-point statement, although it doesn't call it that, but the other statement, in agreement, it's showing where Des differed from the consensus statement. Now, that isn't true.
That's right.
Now, my concern about that is that in history, people will look at that and they will believe it.
Yeah.
You could easily believe it because it's so confusing. And it's confusing because they did it in a very confusing way by changing the titles and engineering the minutes. Now, you may not believe that, but I can prove it.
Yeah, and it is simple when you realise that there was a concerted effort, and in Bill's Ankerberg interview, to say we looked at it, we all voted against Des, and therefore he left. And so people who write the Record article 43 years later or whatever, they're going on the propaganda that's been given to them. So we're here today to kind of set the record straight, excuse the pun. Now, just going to come to you, Mev, in a moment. We've got Fleetwood watching. Great. Welcome, Fleetwood. If people go and look on YouTube, Fleet WD1, there's some brilliant YouTube resource material that he has put up. Someone else has said, was John on earlier? John is here in the comments. I'm going to bring one up right now. We couldn't get him online. We're going to try and work through that and get him online next week. So John is watching, and he, where is his? And he's just made a comment. So thanks, John. The 10-point critique was not the consensus, nor was it voted on. The consensus was effectively ignored as the 10-point critique was used to trump what had been agreed in Glacier View.
That is correct. Look, just to make sure I get it on in case you cut the program off, just a couple of things I want to say. When you go back through the history, and I have done this minutely, I've spent thousands of hours on it, basically to give our position, give our side, you know. I don't want to hurt and offend the church or anything, but I think we've got a right of reply.
Of course. It's
very clear that the whole thing was predetermined, and you can tell by all the General Conference men, and I've listed all this stuff elsewhere. In fact, I did it on a chart that I gave to you, that they said beforehand that Des was going to be fired. And also, Mev will bring out one instance, but the leadership in Australia stated before Glacier View, Des was not going to survive the week and he would be fired at Glacier View.
Yeah.
So you can look at this. This is what I wanted to say. You can look at this article where the leadership are writing it. They wrote those articles and they're giving their viewpoint, and everything's in the garden lovely because they're in their world and, you know, so on. But in actual fact, it was pre-planned and executed, and it was done very cleverly.
Yeah.
And that's really all I've got to say about that article.
Well, well, we're going to come to the article, and you've already answered everything. What I think, I just want to comment on what John just said there. To me, this totally supports your view, Gillian, without even having to go into the background. Imagine we're bringing together a bunch of people. We're looking at a guy's ideas. We've got over 100 people there. We've had meetings all week, and the leadership's overseeing that, saying we're judging the ideas, not the man. And at the end of the week, on the morning, they bring out the conclusion, the consensus, and everyone goes, yes, we can agree with that. The leader should have gone, awesome. But that proves to me that they had planned already the kangaroo court, because that's when they wheel out the 10-point statement. It's so clear that if you had a bunch of people gather for a week, all agreeing, majority agreeing, we can live with this, stay on, Des, and then wheel out, and then they're not happy with it, obviously. So Neil Wilson, the Aussie leaders, they've all gone behind the scenes and said, what are we going to do? We've got this other plan, the backup plan, which they'd already arranged 2 days before. Wheel it out when most people are gone. Don't vote on it. Take Des to the headmaster's office a little while later, and chop, chop, chop. The chopping begins. That's why I think it's very clear to see that this was a hatchet job. And I think the sad thing is that the propaganda of the church for 40 years concludes with people writing articles that just misrepresent what happened. So we're trying to correct that today. Mevin, give us some thoughts. You've been sitting there so patiently. Appreciate it.
Sorry, man.
That's fine. I'm just sorry John Rosie is not with us, but he's in spirit.
And in comment.
I think I'd see myself as an ex-Pharisee of the Pharisee, and I'm quoting Paul, that he did everything that the Pharisees want. Now, that was my life till I was about 30. My mother was Helen Burnside, and her brother, of course, was George Burnside. And I grew up attending his missions and seeing how, at the time, he was highly revered. He filled the Brisbane town hall. He baptized, 300 people, and he could walk on water just about. Just before Glacier View, he went into the Sydney Adventist Hospital for an operation, and Pastor Parmenter went up to visit him. He sat by his bedside and they talked about the upcoming Glacier View. And I am not familiar with the actual words that were used, but when Uncle George, I'll call him that now, came out of hospital and came home, and he said, I've been talking to Pastor Parmenter, and I can tell you, Des Ford is finished. Wow. And everything that Jill said and yourself about a hatchet job was absolutely confirmed. And one of the things that disappointed me was that during the preparation for Glacier View, Neil Wilson told all parties to remain silent. And by and large, Des remained silent. He sat in the basement typing away, being proofread and all that sort of thing. But I attended the General Conference in Dallas in 1980, and one of the speakers was Elder Pearson. And he got up and made a very emphatic statement, which he says, there is no need to look into the sanctuary doctrine. The question was settled a century ago by the prophet. And I mean, how's that for remaining silent? And then when, of course, it came to Glacier View, he wrote an emotive letter, and he said to Neil Wilson, "I'd like you to read this to Glacier View." And he was emphasising the fact that the doctrine as it was presented was the gospel truth. One of the other things that I saw Bill Johnson comment on, that when a document's gone to the General Conference, that's the highest authority on earth. And he didn't quite complete that phrase, but it's an Ellen White statement that the General Conference in session is the highest authority on earth. Now, I've got to tell you that a little while ago, and I found a manuscript where Ellen White said, "I have lost confidence in some of the decisions of the General Conference." Now, anyone who reads that statement will know that that is so papal. I mean, it's so... when the Pope sits in session, he's the highest authority on earth. Now, look, the highest authority on earth is the Scriptures. There's no doubt about that. And this ideology, in fact, a couple of weeks ago in the Sabbath school, the teacher said, when it's gone to the General Conference in session, that's the highest authority on earth.
Yes.
At the time, I remained silent because I was only a visitor. But I just want to question that, Peter.
Yeah, look, wow, you've got 3 bombshells there, Mev. Appreciate those. And wow, that incredible stuff.
Peter, could I say something else? I'll try and be
Yes.
quick.
Of course you can.
Darren Pratt asked me about when did Des find out.
I was just going to bring that up on the screen.
Right, about the 10-point statement.
Now
it wasn't shared with him before. He didn't see it on the Friday morning. It was presented to him in the afternoon. And when it was presented to him, it was on a sheet of paper, so it was short.
Yes.
10 points, very little. There were scripture quotes, but it wasn't evidence. And
yes.
I was telling Mev today that Des said, "Give it to me, I'll read it. I'll be able to comment on it better. I'll get it in my mind better if I read it instead of you." So he read it and he said he agreed with it. He didn't agree with the first point, which basically said that he was using wrong sources. Now, this came from Arthur Furch, and it wasn't true that. But anyway, I won't go into that. And he said, yes, he said the rest is pretty much where I differ from the traditional view. And so he said, but it's got no evidence in it.
No.
I mean, Des was smart. He could see what they were going to do. They were going to fire him using the 10-point statement. And Bob Spangler said to him, and I've said this before, "Oh, don't worry, by the time we publish it in the ministry, it'll have evidence, all right." And Des said, "Well, I hope I see it before it's published."
Yes.
Bob Spangler said, "Yes." No, I was there and I challenged Bob Spangler with it several years later, and he said he'd forgotten.
Yeah.
So what happened was Des had been fired before that October 1980 thing was published, and Des never got the ministry with a 10-point statement published in it because they took him off the mailing list immediately.
Oh, wow. Yeah, boy. Yeah.
So that's answering.
Yeah,
Darren's
that.
question,
Yes. I'm just going to bring up another thing that Darren raised that may cover that as well, and I'm also going to bring up.
You remember that the only reason the consensus statement came up in the Friday afternoon was that Vice President Francis Wernick suddenly put his head up and he said, "What do you think of the consensus?" And Des said, "It's great. I can live with it."
Yeah.
And they didn't believe him.
Yeah. And then
look, they did not seem to grasp that there was a difference between the consensus statement and the 10-point statement. Because remember, most people had voted it in.
Yeah.
Which means they weren't aware. Both sides voted for it.
What the administration were doing though were they number crunched. Neil, Pearson, the Aussies all went, if we don't maintain the authority of Ellen White on a pedestal, It's like a 1919 situation again. We're going to lose our members. We have more members if Des is not around. That's as simple as that. And so as an administrator, they go, he's just got to go. And in some ways, if Des had kind of stuck around, maybe there would have been a minimizing of Ellen White's authority over the ensuing years. So, you know, in a crazy way, their Machiavellian attempts to keep the church traditional worked. Mevin, you wanted to say something?
Yes. There's a Facebook user has written in the defense that Des' document was judged by the scripture and found wanting is untrue. Now, I want to agree with that, because if I'm talking to somebody about 1844, the investigative judgment, or when Christ entered the most holy place, I take 4 witnesses out of the scriptures. And I just want you to see that Des's position was scriptural. I'm very simple. 14 times it was prophesied, come now and sit at my right hand, and I will make thine enemies a footstool. Now, I remember the evangelist used to thump the desk and say, if it's prophesied, it's as good as done. And it was prophesied that come now and sit at my right hand, and I will make thine enemies a footstool. That's 14 scriptures in prophecy. The next one is, I want to ask Mary, when she came to the tomb, what did Jesus say to you? He said, touch me not, I have not yet ascended to the Father. So Mary, where did he go? He was going straight to the Father. Now, then we asked Stephen, and he stood before the Sanhedrin and totally changed the topic. And he said, behold, I see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Now, that was interesting because he saw him standing. All the scriptures talk about Christ seated at the right hand of God, and he observed that he was actually standing. Why? Because he was paying respect to the martyr that would be dead within a few hours. And he noticed that difference. And so then we say to Paul, what have you got to say about it? And he said, he by his own blood, having purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of God. Now, it's so clear. It's all there in my simple mind. That's the way I explain it to people.
Yeah,
now,
very clear.
Once I was talking to Pastor Tolhurst, and I asked him for the dates. When did Christ talk to Mary? He was spot on. I think he gave the approximate date of AD 31. When did Stephen speak? He said AD 34. Oh, we're getting warm now. When did Paul write, he by his own blood, having purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of God? Well, I don't know, AD 40 or something. So when did Christ go to the most holy place? And remember that when Christ and God are sitting together and Christ is seated as a kingly priest, not an Aaronic priest, as a kingly priest, he gave the right date, sometime after AD 34, maybe AD 40. So there you've got the evidence brought before the cross, with Mary after the resurrection, Stephen before the Sanhedrin, and Paul, all said that Christ went to the most holy place.
Incredible. So clear.
In my money, it blows 1844 right out of the water.
Oh.
I have to summarize. I'll finish off on this, Peter. The Americans have sold us a pup.
Wow.
The Americans have sold us a pup.
Yeah.
And we can only be humble Bible students and kneel at the foot of the cross and the Bible and the scriptures.
Yeah.
And it's all there.
Yeah.
And Des was right. The church had an alternative. We've either got to revisit this and throw out 140 years of idolization of the pioneers. The pioneers are everything.
Yeah.
And let me say this one last thing, Peter. I worked for the denomination for 23 years as an accountant. And I don't know if you understand the terror that you feel when you're prepared to step out of the line of the 27 fundamentals or differ with Ellen White.
Yeah.
I remember being absolutely terrified, and I can see that Glacier View, the same terror must have been there.
Yes.
They knew what they were in for. And when the black edition of the Ministry magazine came out, one of my colleagues said it was an edition full of lies.
Yeah. Wow.
And I had to agree with it. It was just a whitewash.
Yeah. Yeah. And to them, it was just a big numbers game. Like imagine if we were running a business together, Mevin, and we've got 1,000 employees, and
right.
we realise that we've got some truth that may shake them to their core, and we go, look, if we tell them this, we're going to lose 900 members. We'd probably consider, do we tell the truth or do we hold it back? And then if you add all the suppression on top, the threat of job loss, they played a numbers game. They just did what they had to do to keep their membership high and ignorant.
You're absolutely right. Now, I had a point that I'd really like to make.
Sorry, I interrupted. Gillian knows I do that.
It might come back.
We haven't even looked at the actual article.
Now, and before we all go rogue, leave the questions to me, because I've got a little plan in my head as I bring them up, and we're going to let John have a say. Mev, you think what you were going to say. If it comes back, put your hand up.
Okay.
And
the word came back that the scholars disagreed with Dr. Ford. Now, I, very early in the piece, got a letter from Andrews where they wrote to Neil Wilson and spoke on behalf of the scholars and said, what you're putting out there is not what we discussed at Glacier View. And that I knew what was going on as soon as I got that the scholars did agree with Des, and they protested. Neil Wilson's got access to the press, to magazines, the Australasian Record, the Review and Herald, the Ministry magazine. It all came out as a snow job.
Yeah.
Then I got a letter from the scholars that said, look, this is not what happened. And Jill's got a copy of that letter, I think. In fact, I'm sure
there was a number of them.
And the thing is, a lot of them say, when you say they agreed with Des, a lot of them go, oh, we didn't agree with everything. That's not the point. The point is they came into a consensus of agreement, common ground. Yes, there was things they disagreed with and they didn't like. One thing that came into my mind then too, that a lot of them say is, oh, Des, he wouldn't listen and he would just, this is his ideas. The fact is he knew that they were asking, what are your ideas? He didn't want to play the game of watering it down and pleasing the masses. He was asked, present this at Glacier View. So he did the 3-book manuscript and the 997 pages or how many it is. And he spoke his truth as clearly as possible. And I don't, when people say he was stubborn about that, I admire his strength and courageous nature to speak his truth clearly so that they could then decide one way or the other. And they decided after a week of over 100 people with great intentions coming together, gathering together, they decided that, thank you, Des, we do come to consensus and common ground. The administrators go, whoa, hang on, what's going on here? And they bring in the 10-point statement. Now, I'm going to go to John Rosier, who's been writing some good comments, and then we're going to get to the article. And this is my brief Wednesday meetings. Yes, I've just bumped it half an hour, so I can go at 6:20.
Just one comment. There's a letter of James Cox's to Hamill, I think, in one of my books, one of my many books.
Yes,
and he says a number of scholars, it means quite a few, saw the same problems as Des did, but they didn't necessarily agree with his solutions.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. It wasn't they differed with him, but they and then Jim Cox said, but they had no solutions of their own.
That's right.
See, that really says
that is very good. That's right. They were too scared to put what they thought out there too much because they're going to lose. Adventism has created this culture of stifling freedom of speech. Okay, we're going to bring up some John stuff here now, and we're going to try and get John on the show next week. John, go and buy a desktop computer. Your laptop's not working. In the opening clip, But Martin was right. The defence that Des' document was judged by Scripture and found wanting is untrue, according to Cottrell for the Spectrum account. On page 19, Cottrell says that they assumed the church position correct and, I have to go off screen, judge everything on that basis. He points out that they never really studied the document or grappled with its theological and biblical complexities, and they never were able to use the Bible nor willing to do so. This document was never judged by Scripture, as Bill claimed on the Ankerberg show. I'm just going to bring up another thing that John says. Because those watching, John was going to be on the show, so that's why he's in the Facebook group making comment. If you read through the opening remarks of Neil Wilson, make it clear that direction this was to go. The church was not on trial, but Des' ideas were on trial. He also indicated that nothing was really going to be changed and that the real issue was the... Where is it? And, oh dear, there's someone... and the real issue was the authority of Ellen White, 100%. And yes, Ellen White did say that about the GC. In fact, she considered it in the early 1890s to be under satanic influence. Now, I'm just bringing up, this may have been already addressed by you there, Gillian.
Yeah, that is a correct statement.
This is so Norm
They
Young
used
and
it to
co were
find
used for a
purpose.
purpose they didn't know about, i.e. the admin believed the traditional view is the only view, right view, and so in outlining the differences they used it to fire Des. Is that correct? That's Darren
Yeah.
Pratt.
Now, they judged him by number 23, the sanctuary doctrine in the 27 fundamentals, which became number 28 later. Now, there's an interesting bit of history there. It makes it more complicated. But when you look at the history of the Dallas Statement, they put it together over about 18 months, and about October 1979, about the same time that Des was about to do the forum, the Andrews scholars were called in, and they didn't like what the GC men had done, so that Fritz Guy rewrote it and had a beautiful statement the church could have been proud of. And Hackett said to them, this is all in this wonderful article by Geraghty. Hackett said to them, it doesn't matter what you say, when we get it back to GC, we'll change it.
Yeah, wow.
And when it came to Dallas in March, I think March or April 1980, the only Loma Linda scholar that was asked to go was Larry Geraghty. And he tells you what it was like being on the committee, and Sabbath was coming, and he didn't agree with it, but they had to close it down and all that sort of stuff. It's a fascinating article. That wasn't the bit I was going to tell you about. Anyway, the statement that Fritz Guy had done had been completely changed. And then on the floor, there were people like Russell Standish who came around changing the details. Then it went back to the committee on which Larry was on, and they were changing it right till the end.
Yeah.
But the point was, Des said they didn't judge him by the Dallas Statement number 23, because number 23, they had missed that Andrews had changed it and put in the Heppenstall view about 2 phases of ministry rather than dates. And they judged Des by great controversy.
Yes.
So that the trouble is it's complicated, and
So Jill, Walter Martin was correct. Walter Martin was correct when he said that Des was judged by Ellen White, not by the Scriptures.
Yes, that's right. His opening statement in that Ankerberg clip we played at the start says that. Yeah, and that is
and remember
so true.
that Trevor Lloyd did an interview before his death with Bill Johnson.
Yes,
and it's in Spectrum about the date. Bill and Des died on the same day.
I know, amazing.
An incredible thing. They're forever joined. They're going to get to the pearly gates, and they're going to have a big hug, and it's all going to be all over. But if you look at Spectrum about that date, there's an interview that Trevor Lloyd did a couple of years before Bill died, and it's even more open than this one. And Milton and I looked at it, and we said we were glad that Bill said it, for the sake of history, that he eventually came honest and admitted that he knew back in the day that Des was done in. Because you would never have known it from the things he wrote in the Adventist Review.
I'm going to do a reaction video to that article, the Trevor Lloyd and Bill Johnson article. Now, I'm going to wrap up some of these questions quick, and then we're going to have a short break, and then I'm going to come back to the article finally. Now, this
But
is
I thought
Stephen.
you were leaving in 2 minutes.
No, remember I just said I've bumped it half an hour. I've got an extra half an hour. We're breaking my own laws. Steve Beagles has written, so most left to get their flights. I'll answer this one. After voting the consensus statement, thinking the whole thing was done and dusted. Basically, yes. There was a lot of joy. Until after lunch Friday, there was a lot of joy. And then Des was taken into the office. They had read the 10-pointer in the meeting, not voted on, just read out.
Well, they didn't know it was going to be used.
No.
See, they were talking to Des. Duncan, we were going to go to England. Des was going to be an evangelist in, where Russell Crans was in London. And Luke said to me, I don't want to go to England. He was 14 at Glacier View. So it was talked about. And then, you see, the fact that it was set up, they had this meeting of Prexad in the afternoon, which was just supposed to be a talk to Des. But I've actually got their notes, and they say enough that you can tell that it was a trial. Then they had 2 more meetings with Prexad. The last one, Prexad defrocked Des, which was quite illegal.
Yeah.
Because his employees were Australia. Australia didn't want to do it. I've dealt with this all in the book, all set up. So they had 3 trials of Des, and in the 3rd one they said Des is too much of a heretic to go anywhere. So they defrocked him, and then Neil Wilson wrote to the Australian executive September the 15th and told them they must fire Des, and 5 people wouldn't. Eric Magnuson, Parr, John Carter, Claude John, maybe.
There was a solicitor from Perth that didn't vote.
Yeah, the guy, Swanell, Roy Swanell.
Oh, right.
Who wouldn't have agreed with Des. He was quite traditional, but he didn't think it was fair.
Yeah, interesting.
And see, Des should have been at that meeting.
Yeah.
And the lawyers in US and the lawyer, Warren, what's his name? Can't think of his name. He was a GC lawyer. And the one over here, both told Des at the time of Glacier View he had a case to sue. You notice that Walter Martin said Des was going to sue them. Des would never have sued the church. And he said to me, I would never sue the church.
Yeah.
But we knew he could. He knew that it was illegal.
Knew it was possible. Now, Fleetwood has said the problem with the Record article is that they only consulted the review, which was skewed toward the GC view. Articles in Spectrum were more factually accurate in 1980. Thank goodness for Spectrum and Adventist Today, who, fought the good fight mostly. Now, we've got a John comment. They certainly gave the impression in the official accounts that the 10-point critique was part of the process to judge the document, and agreed. He's also said, if you read through the opening remarks, I read that one. Here it is. It says, clear as possible in Scripture that Jesus took his seat next to the Father at his ascension. It's in Hebrews. He's agreeing with what you were saying there. Now,
in the official GC minutes of the Sanctuary Review Committee, August 16, 1980, it doesn't mention the 10-point statement. It only mentions the consensus. See, a lot of things were altered.
Yeah.
And people will think that's very unkind of me, but you can see it. It was, like giving these statements different names. It just confuses people. You can't work out what's what.
And it wasn't even a trial. It was a fake trial. The decision had already been made. The outcome had already been decided. It was a kangaroo court.
Exactly.
Stephen Beagles goes off topic here a little bit. We'll come back for another interview with this one. But what do you think of the theory that the sanctuary was dedicated in the most holy and then were preceded in the holy place? Well, I think Adventists don't even talk about holy and most holy anymore. They talk about 2 phases. They changed the wording, so we can't even talk about it anymore. They're very clever. Okay.
Let me just say briefly, After Des was sacked, you've only got to look at what they did in Australia. Bob Parr was sacked after that because they wanted to cut the New Direction, and the lovely Eric Magnuson,
Amazing
a genius Eric Magnuson, was sacked so that they could cut the New Direction for Avondale.
Yeah.
It was, the plan was all in place.
Yeah.
An absolute takeover.
Yeah. Now, this is Carol Platt has written a comment. Ellen White never claimed to be infallible. She has been misused and put in a place of authority that she would not have been happy with. And boy,
however, Burb's got something. You could do it in another program.
But make a comment there. Make a comment there, Mev. While I'm just going through some of these things. Okay, there's hundreds of comments. Comment on that for us there, Mev.
That's a euphemism because so many times she said, "I've never claimed to be a prophet. I'm the Lord's handmaiden," and she made it clear that she was getting everything from the throne of God, and she never had one heretical sentence in their entire work. We now know that that's unsustainable, and I've got 25 statements where she said it came from the throne of God, and that she, after the visions, she forgot the detail, and God would bring up the detail before you and put it all out. Now we know that the detail came from books.
Yeah, I know.
And in fact, if you go to Sunnyside, you look on the at where she's written things, it's her writing falls off down the page. She's scratching sentences away, and it's obvious that she had the books on a desk. She wrote out little sentences and then told Fanny Bolton and Marion Davis, go and make a good book out of this.
100%.
They were star editors for the Chicago Tribune, and they were wonderful wordsmiths.
Yes.
And not many people know, but after their work was done, both of them ended up in an asylum because they were so guilt-ridden.
Yeah, when they realised she was copying,
that they were part of this deception.
Yeah.
And it played on their mind that they were a part of it.
Yeah.
It's not good enough to just make an apology like that.
Exactly. And one thing I've discovered in doing these interviews, and particularly season 2, is the pedestal that even the liberal progressives who like to say, hey, we see her in perspective, she was inspiring, but they still see her as Elvis as well. And so she's just held up, and that's what I can't believe. Like, she is just held up on this pedestal. I've read some of her original work, and then the polished work, the Fanny Bolton, the Marion Davis polished work. And when you read Desire of Ages and Steps to Christ, and you go, wow, that is just so beautiful. You read Edersheim, and he's nowhere near as good as Marion Davis or Fanny Bolton. But you've got to go to your mind, it's actually not Ellen. You read her original handwritten stuff. Yep. You read where she got it from Edersheim and these other guys. You read Marion and Fanny's version and beautifully edited work, and you go, they are the amazing authors and writers, that beautiful writing. So every time you read Desire of Ages or Steps to Christ and think, this is so beautiful, realize it's actually Fanny or Marion or one of the others. Now,
we're getting off the track.
Hey, Gillian, you're bringing me back on track. One last comment. We're having a break, and we're going to the article. I just love Gillian and Des's attitude and pure love.
I just want you to know that Des didn't write what I did, and I didn't write what Des did, but I did correct an awful lot of typos.
There's nothing wrong with editors.
And there was one place where I actually wrote a paragraph because I thought he missed something out.
We're not putting you in the same category.
Well, I've been accused, Des has been accused of writing my stuff.
Marion Ford. No, this is totally different. You're of course, most 90% of authors rely on editors to pretty up their work. But
I've got a lovely letter from Robert Frame to Des, and I'd never seen it, that came late, and I put it in volume 5. And he's saying to Des, I wish you'd put your name on that soteriological implications.
I remember.
Booklet, because having a wife write something is embarrassing. I know she did all the work, but I wish you'd put your name on it. I thought that was cute.
Oh, funny. This is
It
from
actually
Nikki.
wouldn't have bothered me either.
Nice comment here. We'll close this part of the, and we're coming back to read the
yes.
article. After 1 hour and 10 minutes, we're finally getting to the article, the record article that we are setting the record straight on. I just love Gillian and Des's attitude and pure love emanating out of them to those who may have hurt them. What a sign of the truth and love of God shining through them. That's lovely. Okay,
Well, I looked at my life as one of privilege, you know, living and serving with Des and working for the gospel. Really, I mean, there's nothing to complain about.
yeah.
Peter, can I just make a tribute to Des?
Yes, sure.
Every time I've seen him hurt or double-crossed, his attitude was so loving and forgiving. I remember once he had a carton of books that were stolen on the way to a Good News Limited seminar in Melbourne. And he said, well, I hope the person who stole it, I hope he reads them and gets something good out of it. And I've described in many occasions that he was just a righteous machine. He was so programmed. And what would Jesus say and what would Jesus do? And he was so forgiving and loving his enemies. It just left me in awe.
Yeah.
I was so inspired by him.
Well said. And I think when people like Gillian and Des see the light shines. And yes, we have our criticisms and our corrections we're making, but whenever I, have Gillian on the show, the light shines. Whenever I talk to Des, the light shines. And that was a good testimony. What did we call it? What you said was great.
Well, in the end, when these things come out, I don't sleep, but then I get over it. And I think, lucky me.
Well, we were on and off talking till 3:30 this morning. How come you look wide awake and I'm like I've just come out of the bush? Okay, we're going to have a 5-minute break and then we are going to read the fabulous, interesting article and comment on it. And here we go. Back in 5.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
And we're back. And if you enjoyed that music, it's from an album that I wrote many years ago called Standing at the Cross, available on Spotify for free, or you can find me on iTunes and pay some money, which helps. And yeah, back when I used to write gospel songs, that album still survives. Go and listen to it. Enjoy. And if you'd like to support what I'm doing, I'll just quickly put up here. Whoops, wrong one. Go to paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. Really helps what I'm doing, especially now that we're ramping up the re-releases of season 2, and they're getting such an amazing result. Boy, there were so many good questions there. Thank you, everyone. If you'd like to go over to Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, come and join our Facebook group. The links are in the description below, and get involved with the comments and conversation. Now, we're going to, I'm here with Gillian Ford and Mevy Whittaker having a fantastic conversation. This was going to be a 45-minute short reaction video, but we're going a bit longer. That's okay. Doesn't matter. I've got another 15 minutes or so. So we're going to read the article. I think I was going to originally say put your hand up during it, but I think I'll just read it through. It's not that long, and then we'll get your comments after on that. We've probably covered a lot of the ground already, but this article has lots of quotes from the original article. It's looking back. It's like a vintage record release, looking back to an article that was written, I think, in 1980. We'll find out in a minute. And so sometimes it feels like it's just the same article as the original, but it is actually a commentary on that article. And we wanted to have a kind of a, what's the word, rebuttal. We wanted to set the record straight, and that's why we're having our conversation today. And in fact, we're going to have 2 or 3 conversations about this article, because quite a few people have written to me keen to make a comment there. And Darren said a nice thing there, so I'm going to bring that up onto the screen. Standing at the Cross was sung by Peter for my daughter Madison's baptism. Oh, I just got emotional there, Darren. Still treasured that Peter made time for this, and Peter has been a significant influence in her Christian walk. Thank you for saying that. Amazing. Appreciate that, Darren. So let's bring up the article. And, no, we're not trying to criticize them. Record's a great magazine, does so much for uniting the culture of Adventism here in Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific. But we just want to set a few things straight. There's some serious inaccuracies. There's some serious rewriting of history going on. So let's see if I can bring this onto the screen, and I will read away. Now, you guys, even though it's on the screen, we can still hear you, so be careful if you're blowing your nose. And let's see if this works. So can you see and hear me still, you guys?
Yep.
Awesome. So I can no longer see you, but here on the screen is 1975 to 1980 towards Glacier View and its aftermath. And it's from... they're reflecting on this article that was written in the record September. Can you guys, and someone's clicking, it's coming through a bit loud, so just be careful not to click too much there, if that's okay. I don't know if I can't read. I think it's September something 1980.
75 to 1980.
I know, but the actual date of the original article is dated just under editor Robert Parr, September 8 or something, 1980. Oh, here we go. Well, it says August, but anyway, it will become apparent. It's from an article written in 1980. The events of Glacier View in August of 1980, as covered by Adventist Record in the September 8 issue, there we go, September 8, 1980, sparked great interest, dissension and debate amongst Adventists worldwide. Sorry, it just disappeared my end. With repercussions echoing even to the present. Between August 10 and 15, 1980, The Sanctuary Review Committee, a group of 115 Bible scholars, theologians, and church administrators, gathered together to hear and discuss views proposed by Avondale lecturer and Australian theologian Desmond Ford in his teachings and writings. Accurate so far. While some of these discussions had appeared in the pages of record in the lead up to this event, this was the pivotal event of this time period. For those who may not be familiar with the events of that era, the Glacier View gathering was tasked with the responsibility of evaluating the growing non-traditional interpretations of the Adventist Church's sanctuary doctrine, with particular emphasis placed on examining the veracity of Ford's 991-page research dissertation on the investigative judgment. In 1979, Ford's teachings had caused confusion amongst church members and theologians. Little words like that, caused confusion. I would say just a part of looking at things that are different, not necessarily confusing. Anyway, on October 27, 1979, Ford had made a public presentation at Pacific Union College on the topic, the investigative judgment, theological milestone or historical necessity. Sorry, millstone or milestone. Which one is it, Gillian?
Milestone.
Oh, yes. Suggesting in his presentation that the Adventist Church harbored, flaws in its teachings on the sanctuary. The record of January 14, 1980 reports Ford was given leave of absence from teaching to devote his full time to continued research and preparation of a document statement on the topic of the sanctuary and related issues. And boy, that October 27, 1979 is still out there on the internet. Go and listen to it. It's an incredible presentation by Des, and it kind of set the world on fire. Tapes were recorded of the night, and it started in one venue, went to a bigger venue, went to a 1,000-seater venue, and it was packed. Try and find it if you can. It's an incredible listen. Following this 6-month leave of absence, Ford was invited to the Glacier View conference to review his findings, July 14, 1980 issue. What the conference found was most challenging in his assertions was the claim that the doctrine of the sanctuary, as traditionally held by Adventists, could not be supported directly or solely by Scripture. Adventist Review reprinted in the record. And that's where I think when Des said all the leaders agreed, all the scholars, I think that's what they were agreeing to. They didn't agree with the minutiae of that, but they were all saying, I don't think it can be supported solely or directly by Scripture. Making my 2 cents in as we go. These views led some to doubt the accuracy and reliability of Adventist theology, as these views cut right to the heart of Adventism's origins, including the understanding of the significance of 1844, the Advent movement, and the Great Disappointment. Glacier View was an attempt to put to rest this confusion and come to an understanding of the proper interpretation of prophecy regarding the investigative judgment. Former Adventist Review editor Raymond Cottrell described the meeting as the most important event of this nature in Adventist history since the 1888 General Conference in Minneapolis, which had discussed and established righteousness by faith in Adventist doctrine.
And of course, just
from the Adventist Review.
There,
yeah.
Ray Cottrell was very much on Des's side.
Yes. In fact, he took a Spectrum meeting the month before.
He took one at Andrews for the faculty and one for the faculty of Loma Linda within a couple of weeks.
After maybe, but around the same time.
Around the same time.
For some reason, Des is just ignited.
Well, he was much better known, and Ray wasn't.
Yeah.
Wasn't a wonderful speaker.
And an amazing speaker, an incredible speaker. The record September 8 issue in 1980, volume 85, number 36, covered in great detail many of the theological deliberations, implications, and questions which arose from the Glacier View conference. In fact, an 8-page insert was reprinted from Adventist Review with reporting from Australian William Johnson and a forward note from K.S. Parmenter, Australasian Division President, now SPD. 3 consensus statements emerged from the deliberations of the Sanctuary Review Committee. The first concerned the principles of Christ's service in the heavenly sanctuary. The second concerned the role of Ellen White's writings in doctrinal matters. And Gillian, you've pointed out it's not, that's just one in two parts. And the third set forth the major points of difference between the views expressed in Ford's document and the consensus achieved at Glacier View.
See, that's quite wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's the 10-point statement between the views expressed in Ford's document and the consensus achieved at Glacier View. So important. I said we'd read it and then add, but it's so important, and you can both say something if you like. This is not true. This first one that the person has said is the three, the two is really just two, which is just one in two parts. And this one that is the 10-pointer that was not voted on, they're suggesting that that is the document that the consensus achieved. And they're saying that it was consensus that Des should be, there was no common ground. That's what they're saying.
It's possible that whoever wrote the article was a young editor and saw three statements in there and thought that they were all consensus statements.
Sure.
Now, that's quite possible. Let's be nice.
Oh, and that doesn't even worry me if they thought there were three. What the problem is they're saying that the 10-point one, this third one, which is really the second one, what they're saying is that they reached consensus on that. The common ground was against Des. It's not true.
Not true.
Not true.
It was not connected to the consensus statement in any way.
Exactly. It's the little one wheeled out later on to achieve the desired goal of the prejudgment. In the same issue, Pastor Parmenter included the editorial wedges. In it, he encourages church members not to become reliant on theologians or scholars and laments that there is a communication gap in the church. To address that, he said the church had voted to provide record to every Adventist home. The provision of a copy of the Australasian record for every Adventist home is one recent action taken to ensure that we have an informed membership in our churches, but we must look for other ways of communicating with each other as the Advent family enlarges. It is clear that church leadership was aware of the danger of misinformation, speculation, and accusation that was rife in the wake of Glacier View. It was rife because they didn't present what happened. For onlookers, questions and opinions about the events led to rumours and challenges arising in relation to the church's treatment of Ford during the conference. Articles, letters and documents written by people who are not at Glacier View and hence receive their information second-hand or third-hand have been circulated, apparently attempting to surround the meetings with a climate of mystery. These reports have contained speculation, distortions of fact, falsehoods and statements that tend to undermine confidence in church leadership. In a commitment to keeping church members informed concerning events that affect and interest them, the Adventist Review composed an editorial to respond to recent rumours and questions, which was published in Record. One of the queries raised was the question of whether there was a sharp division among the members at the Glacier View conference over the theological views. In response to this question, it was observed that the unity was remarkable, produced with, we believe, by the Holy Spirit. Doubtless no two people, whether theologians, administrators, or others, will see things exactly alike. There will always be some difference of opinion. But at Glacier View, administrators and scholars agreed with each other as consistently as administration agreed with administrators and scholars agreed with scholars. This is the line I really dislike. The majority of both groups were thoroughly satisfied that the historic positions of the church have better support than the alternative positions offered. That's just an outright lie.
Well, most of them hadn't read it.
And in the information they'd been given, they were studying, talking about it in different groups the whole week. They came to the common ground conclusion. The common ground, the majority of groups were thoroughly satisfied with the consensus. But this is trying to say the majority were thoroughly satisfied that the historic positions of the church have better support than the alternative positions. No, they came to a consensus. They came to common ground, and Des said, I can go along with that.
That's right.
In my opinion, that's just so false, rewriting history. And I wonder if the person who wrote this, if they watch the interview that I just put up, the re-release of my interview with Bill Johnson, I wonder if they watched it, they would rewrite this in a different way. The teachings and views of Desmond Ford marked a significant period in Adventist history, resulting in both a shaking and a strengthening of Adventist doctrine, forcing one and all to look critically at their beliefs and search the scriptures for proof of them. No belief was beyond reproach, and all matters were reassessed for their biblical accuracy. That didn't happen. You were just like, which side are you on? You're on this side, you're out. And then for sure, the side that stayed and weren't kicked out reinforced or remained quiet and didn't talk up. Unfortunately, this period of doctrinal challenge resulted in the loss of many from the church and from the faith. It is clear looking back at this time that record was a key vehicle for communication with church members, and church leaders were very aware of the importance of that communication in the life and confidence of the church. I'd just like to add they're aware of the importance of that communication as being a wonderful tool for propaganda. Okay, so that's the article, and I'll be quiet. And Mevin, let's go to you straight away here. What are your thoughts?
I remember, actually, I think the numbers of Adventist ministers that left employment was about 160 to 180, as far as history tells me. But I remember a statement made by Pastor Parmatter that he said he wasn't distressed if he lost all the ministers, that what he would do is communicate to the head elders, and they would shepherd the church. And I thought that was a terrible thing to say.
Yeah,
And actually, to read that,
it's a slap in the face.
Yeah, to read that article,
genuine questioning ministers, genuine hearts.
Correct. That article was a lava of palaver.
Which article was that?
What he just read from the record.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It was so muted. They don't realise that those of us that lived through it, we wept over it, we discussed it intensely, and that when somebody loses their lifelong career, I mean, it costs about $1 million to train a Seventh-day Adventist minister by the time you take in high school and 4 years at Avondale and then 7 years before they're ordained, whether they're called brother and internship, and to just flick them like that. I remember you interviewed one of the Hammond boys.
Yes, very much.
Gordon Hammond, and he sat down in front of Ethel Tolhurst. He said, "Now be careful what you say. I had a part in sacking 160 Adventist ministers."
Yeah.
And then told his son that he didn't. Had nothing to do with it. Do you remember?
Yeah, that was another interview.
Yeah. But no, the emotion of the time was unbelievable. And on the campgrounds where everybody was talking about it. And I did a tour of the United States for 6 weeks or so. And I remember in Colorado, there was an evangelist there. And he said to me, "I wonder what's going to happen to Des." He was concerned.
Yeah.
Now, he wasn't an Avondale person. He wasn't an Australian, in the middle of America.
Yeah.
I wonder what's going to happen to Des.
Yeah,
so to write a tepid article like that does not capture the spirit of the thing. And there's no suggestion that Des was right, where we all know that he was.
Yeah.
In fact, he said, I said to him once, "How did you feel with all those people over there looking at you?" He said to me, "You know what, Mevin?" He said, "I never lost a friend at Glacier View."
It's actually true. I mean,
that's not love.
It's the same.
That's not love.
Yeah. That's love in motion right there. That's grace, graciousness in motion.
I mean, we went back to PUC once when, I think it was when Ray Mitchell was there, and the whole congregation stood up and clapped us.
Yeah.
And when we were leaving America, I met Will Eva, who was the son of Duncan Eva, a wonderful, wonderful vice president of the church. And Will was he was the editor of the ministry. And I said to him, "I'm Jill Ford." And I said, "Just about, Des has gone back to Australia. And he gave me a big hug and he said, "You tell Des we love him." See,
Wow.
that's the way
Yeah.
we got treated. So
Yeah.
a lot of this stuff was sort of out there.
You missed a lot of
I've sort of
things that
made most
a lot
comments
of us went through.
on that article, but it just talked there about misinformation.
Mm.
Um,
Now, before I get your view there, Gillian, I just want to actually thank Jared Stackelroth, who is the editor of the review. I think he
Yes,
has
he is.
been. I think he still is. For at least presenting this material. And a lot of people say, why are you still banging on about it? Because it's never been addressed. In 2020, we have Bill Johnson being more open about it, and Fritz Guy, Larry Geraghty, a couple of interviews with them. And we welcome this opportunity to speak back into the record article, and it has the record, or just record, or whatever it's called now, have done an incredible job at keeping the connection. But we've just got to be aware that that kind of thing, when monopolized, can be used as a propaganda tool. And we're concerned that this article truly misrepresents what happened at Glacier View. In fact, it flips it on its head. And so
but it's actually what you'd expect.
Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't be shocked. But thank you, Jared. And I've invited Jared to be on the program via email. I don't know if he's seen it or not yet. I haven't heard back. I invite anyone that wants to defend this article to come on the program. You're welcome. Share your view. I'm not trying to shut down, even though I have a bias towards a certain viewpoint on this. I'm not going to shut down people's views if they oppose mine. And the second thing I wanted to say is that I did value that Bill Johnson came on to the program and spoke for 2.5 hours. We had a very warm conversation, lots of laughing. He said off air, he said, that's one of the hardest interviews I've ever done after we finished. And we're all human and flawed, so I'm not judging him. I just thank him for finally being able to be more open. And I think if more people speak up, we'll just come to our own consensus document where we can all find common ground. Now, I'm going to give John one little two comments, and then Gillian, you can close. So ponder that. John, who was going to be on the show, John Rosier, we're going to get him on in the next week or two. In the UK, it passed almost unnoticed by the vast majority of the members. We lost 5 ministers, to my knowledge, and those who knew did discuss it and believe Des was right. And I thought that was John. No, we'll just bring up. Phil Curry has written, it's interesting that guidance was given not to rely on theologians or scholars. Being in the healthcare space, in my line of work, that would be like saying, when it comes to your health, don't rely on doctors for a church. For a church that relies on, and its constituency is guided by ministers, their theologians and scholars, this advice to its constituency has sold out the church's right-hand men and women. What a betrayal. Let's see it for what it is. Yeah, well said. Thank you there, Phil, for saying that. And it is a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face to all those that were there, that put their heart into it, that would genuinely see. You can tell that Bill Johnson was genuinely hoping that Des would stay. And there's that moment where, Des says, I can agree with that. I can go along with that. Where they all were suddenly filled with joy. Imagine what the church would have looked like if Des had stayed and that diversity had been allowed. Whoa, 40 years later, imagine what a denomination it would be.
Wally Scragg tried to save Des and bring him over to the new gallery in London. And he was our division president. I thought that was a wonderful gesture. I think that got knocked.
Can you just say that again? It just dropped out a little bit. Let's just say that point again, sorry.
Wally Scragg, who had been the Australasian division president, was then president of the Northern European Union, and he tried to clear the way for Des to be the #1 evangelist at the new gallery. Isn't that
Now,
right?
how do you know this?
Yeah, because I've heard John talk about this too. Yeah,
Have you
how
not
do you
heard
know?
that, Jill?
Yes, I have,
But not validated.
it's in the John Castle interview, which I only read in the last few years, where he says this, and I'd always suspected it. But where did you hear it from?
Oh, it was common talk, whether it was in Spectrum or in the discussions.
No, it wasn't. It might have been over here. Somebody may have known, but it
Yeah.
was Wally. Now, what happened? He came over for Dallas, and he asked to have a meal with us. And of course, again, I was 15 years younger than Des. I didn't know Wally, but they were good friends. They'd been at the extension school together. Wally was very smart, and he's talking away, and I'm sitting there listening and trying to work out, now, why did he ask us to go and eat with him? And he was telling us how liberal he was, that he didn't think much of Ellen White. He liked a man called Derek Dunnett, I think it was. He wrote A Life on Christ. So he preferred her. And he said, we don't have this problem in Europe. And he's going on like this. And it sort of ended up with no conclusion. And we walked out, and I said to Des, he's going to try and save you and give you a job.
That's right.
Now, there was talk about Des going to a new gallery. And I thought it came from him. And until I read this interview of Trevor Lloyd with Jack Castle, who named Wally Scragg, but otherwise I've never heard it talked about. So it's interesting you knew about it. Yeah, it came from Wally. He tried to save Des. But here's the interesting thing, and this was common. As soon as he knew it was all over, he went back to England. And, of course, we had spies everywhere. I've told this story before.
And don't mention names if they're spies, because remember I took 12 hours to edit some stuff out once.
Oh, yeah, it's all right. It's not anybody. So an editor from the British paper, John Rosie would know him. I can't even think of his name. He contacted us. People would contact us and tell us what was being said the other side of the world. And he said that Wally Scragg had come back and he'd had meetings with the ministers. And he said, you may have heard that Des Ford was coming over to the new gallery. I want to tell you, it's absolutely not true.
Yeah.
I could tell you quite a few of those stories where they ran for, ran to hide.
Yeah, they rewrote what actually was going on.
And we went to Norway in, I can't think what year it was, 1982 or 92. And the Norwegians, there's some very intelligent gospel people over there. And I shouldn't say, they thought Wally was retarded. That's not the word, but because he wrote an article in the paper. See, I better not say it. I'll tell you later.
So Fleetwood said the numbers fired was more than the hundreds in Australia. I think there's estimates that well over 200 in Australia and over 200 in the States. There were thousands fired worldwide. I personally knew hundreds in the US, and I did not know them all. And again, that point of sadness that I often ponder of what could have been. Okay, so we're going to leave the questions. We're going to get Gillian to close with comment on the article, just a nice little short summary. Thanks everyone for watching tonight, our Wednesday Australian time shorter reaction videos. Not shorter tonight.
I commented on most of the stuff I wanted to, but on the misinformation thing, I got accused of misinformation by Pastor Parmenter. So take you back to the Friday meeting where Des was fired when I say he was fired, it was all over. And you mentioned to me, Mevin, reading the review of September 27 in the States. It had something called variant views discarded.
That's
and
right.
It said that this had happened on the Friday afternoon at Glacier View. Now, Parmenter decided that it denied that this happened, but the review published it. Kenneth Wood published it. Variant views discarded.
Rejected.
End of September. Before Des was fired, it was August 27, not September. So it was 2 weeks after Glacier View. and it was before the decision was made to defrock Des. So that will tell you something. Anyway, in that meeting, the two things that we used were the 10-point statement, which had no evidence in it. So it was just a sheet of paper with 10 points. It had some Bible text, but they weren't evidence. So what they did, I've told you that story. By the time it gets into the ministry magazine, it's under the Desmond Ford statement, about page 20 on that October 1980 ministry. And you'll see it's 3 pages long and it's small type. So they've padded it out and they put the evidence in, but they never showed it to Des. No. So that was used to fire him. And then a letter from Parmenter. This also was changed by the time it got into the ministry and the review, and it had 4 points, and I can't remember the 4 points, but 2 of them on the Friday afternoon were about Brinsmead, that Des must dissociate himself from Bob in the review. And the other one was that he wasn't just to pocket his views, he must say he was wrong. And see, these 2 things were impossible. And Des said, because they said, we'll give you 2 weeks, and Des said, you could give me 2 years, and I couldn't respond to that. See, it was that letter was very harsh.
Yeah.
But once it goes into the Australasian record, it's a different letter. It doesn't mention Brinsmead. The whole ministry magazine doesn't mention Brinsmead. So that was what he was fired on. He was given 2 things that he could not agree to. He could not say. Yeah. He said to Parmenter in that Friday meeting, he said to Parmenter, "Are you asking me to lie?" And Parmenter said no, but he said, if you can't agree with the fundamental statement of faith, I shouldn't have to ask you for your credentials. You should hand them in. Of course, they wanted him to resign, but he didn't. He didn't resign. And then Parmenter spoke to us about severance and said that he'd spoken to Lance Butler and that we needn't be concerned because they would give us several months' wages and our fares and the children's fares back home. I'm not sure who was there. It might have just been Luke. So, and then at the end, Parmenter came up to Des and me on his own, and he said, with a smile, he said, what are you going to do? And Des said, I don't know. We knew a bit about Good News at the time, likelihood of it coming in, but he said, I'm not sure. And Parmenter said, well, I'd offer you a job in the SHF, but I know it wouldn't suit you. So I go out, and Fred Veltman, who was Des's boss, says to me, well, what happened? And I said, well, they fired Des, because that's what I really thought had happened. And then the next day, Parmenter came up to me and told me off because I'd spread in misinformation. And he told Fred Veltman this, who went back to PUC and told the rest of the faculty that it was Des's fault. And then later, by about September the 10th, he writes 2 letters to Prexad saying that he'd been misinformed about what actually happened at Glacier View. And he wrote to Des and apologised to him. So, and I asked Des before he died, I said, and when Parmenter spoke to me, and look, Parmenter came home, he talked to all the people at Wahroonga. There were several meetings he took, and he said he was close friends of ours. Well, he'd never spoken to me except to tell me off that one time. We didn't know him. He wasn't a friend of mine. But anyway, and I said to him, well, I thought, he said, you've misrepresented what happened in there. He said, we don't have the authority to fire. It had to go through the committees, you see. 3 committees there and then 1 in Australia. And I said, that's what I thought happened. And Des said to me before he died, because I said to him, I really thought that's what happened. And Des said to me, that is what happened.
You had every right to believe it.
Oh, yeah. And not only that, it was already decided before Glacier View, the firing.
And then just to finish off, when that transcription of that meeting, see, this is one of the things I've done. I've gone over all the documents that I've got, and there'll be about 3,000 pages by the time I finish, because I'm working on volume 6. And it will be an absolute treasure trove for the future researchers. That's what I've done it for. I'm not doing it for now because nobody's really interested, to be frank. But I've gone through the transcription of that meeting that Palmer had, and I've footnoted it. And he talks about, well, you know, if you read it, you'll see it. You've got to go, so I don't want to keep talking.
Well,
But
I think they're important
he's
points.
basically
I'm
making
glad you're.
that I lied. I misrepresented what happened.
No,
And-
and you haven't, and you didn't, and
I
I wouldn't even bother defending that. It's so clear.
Peter, just want to make a point. That man of God, Pastor Lance Butler, was in the same nursing home as my mother, and I had an opportunity to sit down with him. And I because I was an accountant and he was the chief treasurer for Australasia, so we had a little bit to do with each other. And I said to him, Pastor Butler, do you feel that the right thing was done at Glacier View, that we got the right decision? And in all his humility, he said to me, who knows, Mevin? Who knows? He said, I was more interested in, he said, Des is no good at handling money. I wanted to see that he would be financially secure into the future. And
Des was very good at handling money. Just
I thought he was. It's not hard to count. Anyway, here I find that the 4 couriers, CURIA, that's of the Australasian division, one of them had no clue whether Des was treated well or not. Now, I mean, it was man after my own heart. He was an accountant and more interested in balance
numbers.
in numbers than the theology of it.
Yeah.
But I just thought that was staggering.
Yeah, you know, that is staggering.
So all I know is I was a very bad girl. And nobody ever taught me before, you know. The worst
but I must say I love
Pastor Butler.
Yeah, he was a man of God, there's no doubt about it.
Now, guys, support this stream. There's a QR code there now. The QR code, if you want to click it and help donate some money, would be great. And I'm hoping, I doubt it, but I'm hoping that people at conference, union and division level speak up, share their thoughts, their truth. I know a lot of them out there agree with what we're saying, but don't want to say it publicly. So I put out the invitation to you guys, contact me, come. I offer you a challenge. Come on SDAQ&A and agree with what we're saying, because I know you do.
I often wonder to myself, I don't know how they can keep a straight face when they say a lot of the things they say.
I know. And if you watch union guys and SPD guys write on Facebook, even if they're saying family stuff and personal stuff, it's all propaganda. I've had a mission for the last 6 months when I thought of this theory. I'm going to just look at all of them on Facebook, union, SPD, most conference workers, a lot of pastors, and it's all just propaganda. So if you do link me, tag me in a comment that's not propaganda. And the honest truth is, if you make a truth claim and you cannot allow people to scrutinize it or question it, boy, that makes me suspicious of your movement. If you cannot allow, so what they do is they A, don't allow people to question it, and B, I've forgotten what B was. It was a very important one. But they don't allow people to question it, but they won't even try and defend it. So they don't get up and defend it. They just put out propaganda, and they don't allow people to discuss it, or they lose their jobs.
This was the same technique used at the closing down of the Australian Adventist forums. They'd been going for many years, and then Ron Taylor made an edict that no Seventh-day Adventist minister was allowed to speak at a forum.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And so the only speakers we got was Ron Numbers and Walter Ray and all these people that were negative. And then, but no Adventist minister was allowed to speak. And therefore it was skewed a bit.
Yeah, of course.
It was the same technique, and it's just happening over and over again.
I don't want to say the word coward, so I won't. Thanks for watching, everyone. It's been great to have you. Thank you so much, Gillian. I've really appreciated it. Thanks to John Rosier for being here in a way in the comments. Appreciate that. John's going to chat to me, and we'll hopefully get him on the show in a week or two. Thank you so much, Mevin, for your support and being on the program. Really love chatting with you today. And don't forget Gillian's book, Go, and her series, the On the Road to Glacier View, 5 volumes, 6th one on the way.
Look, if you don't want 5 volumes, just get one. Same story in every one.
Go and buy all 5 of them. They are brilliant. Fantastic job you've done there, Gillian. Absolutely incredible work. And people are going to look at that in years to come, and it's going to be so treasured. Yeah. So, right, tomorrow...
Des will like them if he returns. He'll be pleased.
Are you saying there's a second coming of Des?
Well, I'm thinking you might be an Enoch, and that you might get an early pass and come and see me, and you'll be quite pleased.
Oh, dear. Before we descend into absolute tiredness, quick plug for tomorrow, 12 o'clock Thursday, Sydney time, 7 o'clock LA time, UK, it's probably 3 in the morning. I'm interviewing Brendan Valiant about the lunar Sabbath. He says that the Jews never kept it, and is going to debunk some of what he believes that Kerry Wynn and Steve Scott have said in recent interviews. He's going to say that's all rubbish, and we're going to chat about it, and I value him coming on the program to share his opposing view. That's what SDAQ&A is all about. See you guys. Have a good sleep. See you next time.
Goodbye. I'm
Keep up the
leaving.
good work.